You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, Judge Cannon has finally landed on a date for the classified documents trial. That's May 20th, 2024. This is, of course, after the December 11th trial date that was requested by Jack Smith and the DOJ, but it's earlier than the indeterminate post election trial date that the Trump team was seeking. What's your take on this? Is this reasonable, or do you think that this is Judge Cannon just doing more of Trump's bidding?
Yeah, it seems like she split the difference between what Jack Smith was requesting and what the Trump lawyers were requesting. Here's what I'll say, Brian. If this May trial date holds, I think we will look back and say, you know what, it really wasn't an outrage that she gave the defense basically a 10-month run-up to this trial. I have said all along that, a rule of thumb is that federal cases will typically go to trial about a year from the time the defendant is arraigned. Donald Trump was arraigned in June. She set a trial date for May. That's why I say if this trial date holds, I don't think it will be an outrage that she set it so far in advance or so close to the November 2024 election. But that's a big if, because we don't know if this trial date will hold. We don't know if Judge Cannon will be amenable to defense continuance after defense continuance and end up pushing the trial either closer to the election or after the election. But as of right now, I am not outraged by this trial date. I sure wish it had been earlier. I was saying March made sense to me, but here's the good news. If it holds, this trial will be resolved months before the presidential election. So voters will go to the polls knowing if they're casting their vote, assuming Trump is the Republican nominee, if they're casting their vote for a convicted felon or somebody who has been completely exonerated of all wrongdoing at trial. Of course, I wouldn't bet a nickel on that being the result.
Now, Glenn, does the Trump team actually risk screwing themselves even further here if they try for a further delay and push this thing closer to the election, but don't get it past it? So, let's say they try to push for further delay at some point, and she says, okay, well, you got a little bit more of a delay. Now, instead of March, you've got a September trial date or an October trial date. And now we're even closer to the election when this thing is happening. And that presumably would not want to be the lasting thought of that the Trump team is looking for when they send people out to the polls to vote for him. So could they screw themselves even more by seeking a further delay that wouldn't push it past the election, but would actually put it right before it?
Yeah, that's a great point. So, this might help Trump in the primaries, right? Because, his base seems to be all whipped up over his claims that, it's not really a legitimate prosecution. It's election interference.
Right. He's just a martyr in all of this.
Yeah, which of course is absurd. But as you say, if it creeps closer and closer to the general election, I can't imagine it's going to help him in the general if he ends up being on trial while we are all making our plans to go to the polls in November. But, there is no roadmap for any of this. I think the one thing that we can be sure of is nothing that prosecutors will do, have done, will cause Donald Trump's base to abandon him. But I also have believed all along, Brian, Donald Trump is not attracting a single new voter to the party or to his cause or his candidacy, by railing against the prosecutors, by saying everybody's against me, every prosecutor in every jurisdiction. I can't believe that's attracting new voters to Team Trump.
I want to read a few tweets from folks in the space to get your take on them. Brandon Van Grack, he wrote, I'd be surprised if you could find another case where a court gave the parties more than 5 weeks to resolve disputes on a protective order for classified information. Section 3 motion normally takes a few days or 1 week. So if this whole classified documents issue, if the CIPA issue is what's responsible for this delay as far as Judge Cannon is concerned, is responsible for why we have this trial not in December, but instead in May, and it usually takes weeks, why is Judge Cannon giving the Trump team all of 10 or 11 months?
There's no good answer to that question. But I think the real question is, did she set this schedule for nefarious reasons? Or did she set this schedule because she is an extremely inexperienced judge who is not at all confident in her ability to resolve issues in a classified documents, in a national defense espionage case, the way other judges who have been around, who have handled these kind of cases before, would be able to resolve them? So, I think she set a schedule that seems to involve too much time each step of the way. I don't know if that is a product of her being nefarious or of her, just not being the right judge for so many reasons, not being the right judge for this case.
Yeah. Uh, Joyce Vance had tweeted also, judges get to make lots of discretionary calls that can't be effectively challenged by prosecutors. Judge Cannon's schedule is built for delays. And Peter Strzok quote tweeted Joyce and wrote, this trial isn't happening before the election. Do you foresee the opportunity for more delays based on this schedule? Because you'd mentioned that a lot of this was she gave herself such a wide berth so as to give herself more time than necessary. But do you foresee there being more delays even on top of a schedule that already was built for delays?
It's almost inevitable that there will be some additional delays. Here is the big ticket question from my perspective. I have appeared before more than 100 judges. I know because I counted them up. That's military and civilian judges, trial court judges and appellate court judges, federal judges, and local judges. Here's what I know, Brian. When judges set a firm trial date, particularly 10 months down the road, they expect the parties to keep with the schedule that's been set and be prepared to go to trial on the day that has been set for the trial. We all know trials get continued, but when one is set so far in advance, and when it's a federal case, not that the feds are better than the states, I would argue that they're not necessarily as good as the states when it comes to prosecuting cases. But what I do know is federal judges in particular don't like to have their trial date tested unless there are some really compelling reasons to reschedule it. So I am not in the same camp with Joyce or with Peter. I'm loath to disagree with either of them, but I will always call it the way I see it. I think it's up to Judge Cannon. If she is an honest broker of the law, boy, there's another big if, right? If she can sit fairly, impartially, and independently over a case involving the defendant who appointed her to the very job she holds right now, then I think that May trial date can and will stick. But if she's not an honest broker of the law, if she wants to continue to do favors, though, for Donald Trump, then she'll push the trial date.
Now, is the option, with that said, is the option for removing and replacing Judge Cannon effectively off the table as far as you can see?
Boy, I hate to say it is probably effectively off the table, but here's the thing. A motion to have a judge removed from the case, either for some kind of misconduct or for some showing that makes it plain to everybody that she cannot sit fairly and impartially. The federal law says if a judge's impartiality can reasonably be questioned, that judge must be removed from the case. So if tomorrow or if Monday, the judge hands down an order that is so radically out of the mainstream that it's clear that her impartiality can and must be questioned, the prosecutors can make a motion then and there to have her removed from the case. She would be the one who decided the motion in the first instance. And if she refused to remove herself from the case, they could appeal it up to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. So, I do think it becomes less and less likely the longer the case goes on with Judge Cannon presiding, less and less likely that the prosecutors will file such a motion to recuse. But frankly, it's never off the table completely.
Okay. And let's finish off with this. When do you think the January 6th trial, that federal trial, would happen relative to this one? Because there aren't the same SIPA issues, not the same classified documents issues as the classified documents case. Do you think that we would see that one go to trial first?
We could. And I think one of the important data points will be when the January 6th indictment is handed down. Is it only handed down against Donald Trump, or are there a whole bunch of co-defendants, co-conspirators? Because if there are, that will complicate the ability to get the case tried quickly. If it is only Donald Trump, let me tell you, I know most of the federal judges on the federal court in D.C. Most of them, I think, try to move cases expeditiously. And I could easily see if a J6 indictment is handed down against Trump alone, as you say, there will be no, espionage angle, no classified documents angle that the parties will have to contend with. Frankly, that case could be tried well in advance of the May documents obstruction espionage trial down in Florida.
Okay, well, obviously a lot to continue keeping an eye on with all of these different trials. So if anybody watching wants to stay on top of this stuff, make sure to subscribe. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.